It is my pleasure to introduce Rob Sturgill today. Rob is, for profession, he works for Edward Jones, and he has been in that capacity for 26 years. 8 years ago, he started a humanitarian organization, and it has done many good things in many different countries, and his talk today is going to be on what he has been doing in Ukraine. Please join me in giving him a warm welcome.
Try to stay in one place.
Sounds good.
Okay. Pleasure to be with you today. And it's probably good that I kind of give you the take home for today. As many of you know, we're doing a community aid drive for Ukraine. And that's November 7th through the 9th. The drop-off location is going to be at Canyon Crest Event Center. And with winter months coming up and it's getting cold, big drive for coats, sleeping bags, blankets, generators, things that are going to help folks get through the winter. And so that's the take home. And I just want to make mention that it's not just about donations, but also about volunteers to come help pack up boxes and things. So folks who want to come help out during the 7th through the 9th. And I feel very passionate about this. Part of the reason is I've been over to Ukraine a few times just recently, just about 6 kilometers from the front lines, delivering aid. And so the things that I experienced and saw, I don't think I'll ever be the same. And so I am very passionate about this, and so bear with me. But hopefully today you'll get a little glimpse of why I feel so passionate about this. 8 years ago, I set up a charity called Type of Wood Charities. And so that's kind of the organization that I run through to do the humanitarian efforts. That was done after a huge storm in the Philippines, 2013, if you remember, a storm that devastated the islands of Leyte and Samar. So a group of friends and I went over to help rebuild houses. Had a life-changing experience, and so we came back and decided, let's set up a charity. Mainly in the Philippines, but when COVID hit, it shut down the Philippines, so we started to build a school in Africa, and then Ukraine hit. Why Type of Wood? Why the name Type of Wood? That comes from when we were over building houses, the lumber over there that they use is coconut lumber, and when that coconut lumber dries, it turns hard as cement. And so here I am, pounding, trying to get a nail through this hard as cement wood. It's bending, the nails are bending, they're bouncing off. When I finally get it to go in, it starts to split. And I get frustrated and upset because things aren't going my way. I turn to the Filipino helper and say, Joel, what am I going to do here? This isn't going my way. And he just turns to me and smiles and says, Type of Wood. And so that whole trip, when something didn't go our way, instead of getting upset, we would just look at each other and smile and just say, Type of Wood. So when we came home to form that charity, the thought came through my mind is, you know, sometimes God gives us hard wood to build with. We don't focus on the wood, we focus on what we're building, and that's the name Type of Wood Charities. So, February 24th, as you recall, Russia invaded Ukraine. And I think many of us, as we watched the news, we saw the results. Millions of people fleeing the country. Most of them going up through Poland, but many just getting out of that area where they're being bombed. Families being separated, watching newscasts of husbands saying goodbye to their wives and to their children. To me, that was heart-wrenching to watch, and I felt like I needed to do something. And so on March 6th, I was sitting in church, and it just hit me. Rob, you go to Ukraine and you can help out. And the idea came, go rent some vans and shuttle women and children from Ukraine into homes in Poland or other areas in Europe where they would be saved. And so that great idea just came to me, and when we get a great idea, what do? Well, I went home and Googled it, thinking that, let me see if I can pull up information. And lo and behold, I did get a hit. A fellow down in Spanish Fork, Utah, had gone over to Ukraine for a few days and had shuttled folks. So I stalked him on Facebook, called him, and kind of discussed what he had been doing and the possibilities, the do's and the don'ts and different ideas. And that's how it all started. the idea was to go over and help these folks get to safety. And where would we go? We'd either go down to the border, whether it was on the Ukraine side or the Poland side. We would go to train stations where people were jammed in and had to spend 2-3 days sleeping on the floor of the train station because it was so busy that they couldn't get on a train for that long. The other place we went is to these refugee centers where they were grouping these refugees coming in and putting them into a place where they had a bed to rest and food to eat until they figured out where they were going next. The thing was is we weren't picking up people unless they had a plan of where to go. If they had a family or friend that was inviting them in, then we were the resource to get them there, that we would drive them to that place. If they didn't have a place to go, we would leave them at the refugee center because there was food, there was medicine, and there was different countries coming in with different suggestions of where and how they could get a place to stay. This is actually the first night. March 13th, I was in the refugee center and had a young lady and her 2 little kids and her mother approach me about getting a ride. And I actually told her that we'd love to help her out. I was concerned because the vans were full, but I said, why don't you hold off and let me see if one of these other folks decides to get a ride with someone else. Well, luck had it, someone did. And so I told her that she could go with us. And when I told her that, she actually came up and handed me her phone. And so as I picked up the phone, it happened to be her husband on the other line. And her husband was asking me questions of, who are you? What are you doing there? You know, and then the question was, can I trust you? And so I had to explain to him why I was there. You know, watching the news, seeing husbands say goodbye to their kids and to their wives, I told him I wanted to come help, and that's why I was there. Actually, this last trip, I had the opportunity to go meet him face to face. And when I talked to him, I asked him, why did you trust me? You know what his comment was? He said, I had to. I had no other choice. He said, I felt like I was held hostage. I had to trust somebody. And we got to visit about that, a sweet moment. There we go. So we ended up taking his wife and his little kids, and we took them from the refugee center at the border to Krakow, which is a bigger city where there were more train options. And so we were able to put them into a nice hotel room, and the next morning take them to the train station on their way to Germany. This family currently is in Austria. So mom, the 2 little kids, and mother are in Austria. Husband is in Chernihiv in Ukraine, still helping out his people in Ukraine. Where should I go? There we go. One of the days I was in the train station, and you can imagine, I'm sitting there with my phone. I've got my ear pods in. I'm using an app called Zello, which is like a walkie-talkie. And so I'm walkie-talkieing back with everybody who's helping us, the volunteers that were with me, to make sure that we didn't overfill the vans, because that was a concern. We didn't want to offer a ride we couldn't give. And so I was coordinating, making sure that we didn't overfill the seats. And all of a sudden a news team came in and they start broadcasting. And the news lady is doing her broadcast, and she actually starts sliding up, right up against me, almost to where she's touching me shoulder to shoulder. And after the broadcast, I thought that was really weird and unusual, so I walked up to her and I said, who are you guys with? And she said, we're with Fox News. And I said, well, would you like a feel-good story? I've got a story about a family that we just helped the other day. She says, yeah, tell me about it. She says, we're here doing a piece on human trafficking. And so I think what was happening is she was leaning up against me saying, here's an example of what a human trafficker would look like. And so thank goodness I talked to her, because I went from 0 to hero in about 5 minutes. And so here's actually the piece that came out.
Building burned following shelling by Russian forces. Millions of women and children are fleeing Ukraine in what the United Nations is calling the fastest growing refugee crisis in Europe since World War II. And now those desperate Ukrainians are facing threats of kidnapping and human trafficking. Correspondent Aisha Hasni shows us tonight from Poland. Idaho native Rob Sturgill is offering a free ride to a hotel to a young mom who just arrived from Ukraine. He's one of the countless volunteers in Poland showing the best of humanity. But the constant waves of women and children, oftentimes only able to speak Ukrainian, has opened the door to trafficking. A week ago, police detained a 49-year-old man in western Poland for allegedly raping a young refugee girl. He reportedly lured her in by offering her a place to stay. Crisis managers are on the lookout for kidnappers posing as Good Samaritans.
People coming down here and stand outside the center or at the border offering, and when we go and ask them, they can't give us a really good answer for what organization they're coming from or where they're going.
There's also a new system that requires volunteer drivers to register with local authorities and wear a bracelet that proves they are clear to transport refugees wherever they might need to go. Sturgill has that bracelet. He's also sharing his personal information with the refugees to make them feel at ease.
We actually let them contact family, take a picture of our passports, take a picture of our license plates on the vehicles that we have. And sometimes it does take quite an effort to get them because these people they're scared. They are scared to death.
A few days ago, he got on the phone with a worried Ukrainian man and reassured him that his family was in good hands.
It's tragic. That is one of the reasons why we've come, is to help try to be the good guys.
And Shannon, crisis managers at these welcome centers are now talking to police to try to get them to ban private vehicles from showing up at these train stations and border crossings, just to avoid any confusion and in order to protect these refugees. They would like to see these refugees only use buses that are paid for by humanitarian aid groups, and also to be able to only travel in groups. There's always safety in numbers. Shannon? Aisha, thank you very much. So let's get some...
Are being told, be careful of human trafficking. Be careful of human trafficking. And then they meet a fellow at the border who doesn't look like he belongs there, doesn't speak the language, offering a free ride in a hotel room. In the beginning, it was a hard sell. And I mean, I'm serious. We had to actually work at filling the vans. Now, thank goodness we were able to, and we did, but it was with great effort. After a few days, the volunteers, the local volunteers, got to know who we were. And so then we just would show up, and the local volunteers knew that the guys from Idaho and Utah were good guys. In fact, there was an article in a UK newspaper that talked about us, how we were there helping out, and that the folks with Type of Wood Charities were good folks. And so every one of these families had a story. You know, where they came from and what their situation was. This gal right here with the two little kids, her name's Armeen. I actually picked her up on the Ukraine side of the border. One of the situations where one of the volunteers came up to me and says, Rob, we've got a special need. Armeen has cancer and she needs to get up to Łódź, Poland, because they've got a friend that's going to come and pick her up and take her to Germany so she can continue with her treatments. And so I got to witness her saying goodbye to her husband, and the kids saying goodbye to Dad. And it was heart-wrenching, probably one of the most heart-wrenching things I've witnessed. And all I could do in my no Ukrainian is tell him that I gave him a thumbs up, that everything was, I would take care of him and things were going to be okay. 6 hours later, when I dropped her off in Łódź, she got her husband on FaceTime, and he was able to give me this thumbs up. And so a very joyful moment of everybody is safe and everything is good. Each of these families, it was amazing that within 3 to 6 hours you could go from being complete strangers to being family. So this is actually from Armeen's dad. So because we had shared our Facebook information with them, usually a day or two later, we would get a message from these folks that we'd helped out. But this was unusual. This was actually from her dad. Her dad says, I'm writing you, let's see, I'm writing to you as a father of the girl you have evacuated with her 2 small children to Łódź on the night of March 21, 22. There are no words in this world to express my gratitude to you. You have become a guardian angel for my children. I'd like you to know and be sure that all my many friends around the world will know about you, and may God always be the main helper in your affairs. I will pray for you and your family till the end of my days. I bow down to you. Thank you very much for what you've done. Thank you. We only helped, I think, in the time period we were there, over those handful of months, I think we helped like 3,000. That seems to be a drop in the bucket when you're talking 7, 8 million. But you know, we started naming our mission Operation Starfish. And I don't know if you're aware of that story of the fellow on the beach who's throwing the starfish back in the ocean, and there's millions of them. And the gentleman walks up to him and says, "You're not going to make a difference with all these." And he pulls up the next starfish and he says, "I'll make a difference to this one." And he threw that in the ocean. And that's how we felt with this, is we weren't able to help them all, but we made a difference in those that we did help out. Checking back with my little family. So after a little while, I started contacting Malenka, who was the mom, finding out, how are you doing? How are things in Germany? And finding out that they were moving on to Austria. And then I reached out to her husband, Andre. Andre, how are you doing? How are things in Ukraine? Are you safe? Are you okay? What are you up to? And he goes on to tell me about how he's involved in helping out elderly and shut-ins in Chernihiv, taking medicine and food into them. And so we started talking and started sending funds over to him. And here's a little video clip that he sent.
Hi everyone, my name is Andrei Blatenko and I'm head of Sturgill Charity Foundation. I met Rob via phone when my family had to run from the war. I'm very grateful for this sincere act of a real man with a light in his heart. Then Rob saw on Instagram what our foundation was doing and donated for the purchase of medicines that are vital to the people of Chernihiv. We focus on helping elderly, disabled people, families with kids. Victoria Maximova, head of the department of the city hospital, is responsible for the medicine in our organization.
We desire to support the Ukrainian people systematically, the most affected by the war. So if we have the sponsorship, we will be able to deliver the necessary medicine once a month to those who need it. That is a question of life and death.
We buy medicines in bulk. Applications are processed by the administrative department. We have an experienced pharmacist who packs everything and Sturgill delivers everything by bicycles and cars. Please help us to help people who are going through the war right now.
So after the first trip, the focus was helping refugees come out, helping them find safe places. On the second trip, the focus got to be where we had less folks coming out, but there were still a lot of displaced people inside Ukraine, and the needs were great as their communities had been torn apart. So we started sending aid in, and so we started filling vans and sending aid down into Ukraine, medicine, food, and different things. And so we ended up actually purchasing a van and built up a fleet of 4 vans that were sending aid into Ukraine. I had several friends and folks that reached out, people I didn't even know. I had a fellow from California call me up and say, "Hey, I want to go help." He ended up going over to Poland and into Ukraine and helping out. And so we were able to help facilitate dozens and dozens of volunteers get over there and help out. Then after my second trip, I went up and visited the Slavic church up in Boise. And I had worked a little bit with them because we were taking some medicine over with our volunteers and taking it over to Ukraine. And so I went up to ask them and visit with them about how they were sending all the things over that they were, especially the big bulk items. Because we had a trauma unit that was being donated by the Avon, Colorado Fire Department, 5 pallets, a trauma center, you know, that they were willing to give if we could get it over to Ukraine. And so they put me in contact with their logistics guy in Ohio, who happened to have a connection with a company that was flying stuff over when they had free space. And so we were able to take the trauma kit, this is just a little video clip of the 5 pallets. And the main thing that stands out is the stretchers, because that was the hard part of how do we get these stretchers on a pallet and get them over to Ukraine. So that shows the stretchers there in Colorado. Then the picture in the top there is actually the stretchers getting put on the truck in Ohio to get put onto the plane. And then these are the stretchers in Ukraine. And I don't know if anybody speaks Ukrainian, but this is a fellow saying, thank you for these stretchers. These stretchers have already saved people's lives. As I continue to work with this organization that basically has logistics from the United States, and we've created this warehouse in Ukraine, and then they've got a distribution line where they've got vans, hundreds of volunteers who come with their vans and basically fill up their vans and drive them down to the front lines. I thought, this is almost too good to be true. I want to be part of something like this. And so I started helping fund them with fuel and to get things continuing on with their process. And then we found out that we were getting quite a bit of supplies built up in Poland that were being shipped over, but we didn't have enough semis to take them down. So we ended up picking up a semi that's dedicated now of just picking up our supplies coming from the U.S. and driving them from the port in Poland down to the warehouse in Ukraine. This is actually a little video piece that shows you the warehouse and the distribution out to the front lines. This is the warehouse in Ukraine. These are our volunteer drivers. This is footage from them. Tanker of fuel that I paid for to help supply the volunteers. So up in Boise, they've done, they just finished last week their 3rd donation drive. This is an example of their donation drive. And they were gearing up to do their third donation drive that just happened last week. And I just thought, why aren't we doing this in the Magic Valley? And so I thought, I want to put something together. But before I do that, I'm going to go back to Ukraine one more time, and I'm going to follow aid from Idaho all the way to the front lines. So that when I stand in front of people in Idaho and I tell them, I can guarantee that this is getting to the front lines, I can tell you personally that these supplies are getting to the front lines. So on September 23rd, I hopped on a plane and went over to Ukraine for 10 days to visit that warehouse, to visit all the different little churches that we send aid out to that then distribute it to the refugees or use those products to help out the soldiers on the front lines. I was able to go with a convoy of 5 vans down to an area that had just been liberated by the Russians and deliver aid to that area. This is me arriving in Poland. These are my drivers up here, Nazar and Sasha. They are Ukrainians. They lived in Lysychansk, which is occupied by the Russians. Their homes have been completely destroyed. Their families are in Germany, but these two continue to drive aid into some of the hottest areas in Ukraine. They were in Bakhmut the other day. In fact, I was talking to them the other day. They're headed to their hometown in Luhansk and Lysychansk, which is still occupied, trying to get aid to friends in those areas. The group also consisted of 5 Ukrainian Americans, 4 from Ohio and 1 from New York, and we all went in together. We visited churches. This is one church that's taking medical supplies, actually medical supplies that were sent over by St. Luke's, and they're using those to build these tourniquet kits. And those tourniquet kits then are getting sent to the front lines. This day, they'd made 13,000 so far. And I had the opportunity to deliver some of those kits. I also had the opportunity to see how these kits are being used. And I'll tell you what, that's where I don't think I'll ever be the same, is seeing the death and the destruction of war and how tourniquets can save lives. This is actually another church that we went to that received aid. I don't know if you can see the little sticker on there, but it has the Idaho, picture of Idaho, and it says Boise, Idaho on it. That's showing the aid that came from the Treasure Valley. Now, ours is going to say Magic Valley on it, by the way. So in the future, we'll be able to see our stickers getting delivered with the supplies to the front lines and to those areas. But they were taking sugar from Winco, by Amalgamated Sugar. Anybody Amalgamated? Amalgamated sugar and baking cookies with it that were getting sent to soldiers. Cliff Bar sent over 8 pallets. And I had the opportunity to track those from Twin Falls, Idaho, to Boise, to Ohio. And in Ohio, they determined it's critical, we're going to throw it on the plane. It's not so critical, we'll put it on a shipping container. They saw these Cliff Bars and they said they're critical. They threw them on a plane. They went to Amsterdam, trucked down into the warehouse. Here they are in the warehouse. I actually personally delivered boxes of those to the front line. Here's a little clip on Cliff Bar. So these are just more boxes in that warehouse that had those Idaho stickers on them. This is just a small group of the drivers. There were over 100 of them. And I took over some Idaho shirts. And a handful of the guys, I said, hey, would you put on these shirts? Let's take a picture. I want to send it back to the group up in Treasure Valley. So they're all wearing these shirts with Idaho on them. But these are the true heroes. These are the guys that are driving down to the front lines, taking food and medical supplies to those newly liberated towns. I had the opportunity, we did a thank you dinner for these guys, and got to meet them face to face. And it was beautiful because I've been praying for them. Didn't even know who I was praying for, but praying for our drivers. And I got to go meet them face to face. This is the 7 suitcases that I took over on this last trip filled with medical supplies that were then being dispersed out to go to hospitals. This is just showing that I actually worked there while I was in Ukraine. I helped load vans. And that's the beginning of loading the van. But what I want you to see is, here is the end of loading the van. And you would say that's full, but guess what? It wasn't. All those cracks, they were shoving packages of diapers in those cracks. They were filling every inch of those vans. This is actually our military escort. So to get down where we were, we had to have a military escort. This this bridge was bombed out to the side, so we're crossing on a pontoon bridge. That was a temporary bridge. This is a little video clip. It shows the vans coming across. The red one actually gets stuck. As it comes off that bridge, it gets stuck. It's so heavy it can't get up the hill. We ended up having to run down and carry or push that van up the hillside. It seems like once we crossed that bridge, we got into ground zero. This was the area that, if you read here about a month ago, the Russians had occupied it. They had built a base there. They had a missile silo. And the Ukrainians launched a rocket into that, and it blew up. And so the forest through there was just toasted because of that. But that's really the moment that pushed and kept the Russians on the run. And from that day forward, it seems like that was the turn of the tide. This shows you a little bit of the village that we were passing through. Just completely decimated. This is the village actually where we stopped. If you listen, you might be able to hear the bombs going off in the background. So, and that was the shelling. While we were there, it was just continued shelling as we were handing out these supplies. This is just another video of handing out food to that little village. This fellow, as we first pulled up, he came out of the village and he walks up to me and he's just sobbing and telling me his story in Ukrainian. I don't understand Ukrainian, so I asked the translator to come up and translate for me. He goes on to tell me that he's been living in fear. He's been scared to death. He said his son and daughter serve in the Ukrainian military. He was afraid that his neighbor was going to rat him out, and that that he would be taken out back and gotten rid of because he was a Ukrainian sympathizer. This was delivering those first aid kits to the field hospital right there by Zoom. This is coming back across that bridge. You can see a tank down in the water there from that perspective. This is where I felt like I had been transported back 70 years. I felt like I was in the middle of World War II. After we dropped off those supplies, we ended up in this little church. And we had these 4 Ukrainian women with a little girl who had cooked us dinner. And we're sitting there eating dinner in the dark. So the next slide is showing just, you've got a Ukrainian woman washing dishes by flashlight and explaining their circumstances and their needs. They're concerned. The winter months are coming up. It's going to get cold. They need things to be able to stay warm. And as you are probably aware, right now 40% of Ukraine is without power because of all the bombing. And so it's
still in the Kharkiv region. We've been invited to have dinner before we go on. These lovely ladies have cooked a wonderful dinner.
Here she is washing dishes. And then from here we drove up to Poltava. We got there about midnight. And as we get into the hotel, I just get a text message from my friend saying, Dnipro has been bombed tonight. And he sends me these messages showing me the bombings. And so I hadn't showered for 2 or 3 days because we had been traveling all the way to the east. So I hop in the shower, I come out, and here's what is going on when I get out of the shower. So the air raid sirens are going off, so it made for a little bit of a restless night. Not sure, are they real? Are they just, you just never knew. Just a couple more stories and I'm going to wrap up. This one is where I got to meet my friend Andre, the fellow who I spoke to on the phone, who asked me, can I trust you? On this trip I actually got to go meet him face to face, and so this was our first greeting and meeting, and got to visit with him and talk about the situation in his family. Took a couple pictures, got to video chat with his wife and kids, them in Austria and Andre in Chernihiv. This is actually his town. Chernihiv got bombed horribly in the beginning of this war. And this is 7 months later. Here's what it still looks like. That's a civilian apartment. Big apartment complex. Every floor looks just like that. We met folks who were actually coming and going through their things, seeing if they could rummage through and find any personal belongings that were worth keeping. One of the ladies that lived in the apartment next door came up to us. Here she is. She actually was showing us how her arm was almost blown off during the impact. One of the fellows that was with us was a pastor. Asked her, do you have hate? Do you have hate for the Russians? And she said, I don't have room for hate. I have no place for hate. And here she is. You can see the smile on her face, and that's the way she was the whole time as she explained her story. The last thing I'm going to share with you is I had a group of kids in Utah reach out to me and said, we raised money for Ukraine. We sold lemonade, we sold trees, we raised $1,100. Can we send it to you, and can you help out in Ukraine? And so I said, you know what, I'm going to work on something where you guys can help out kids in Ukraine. It took me months, but I finally got to do it on this last trip. So this is in an orphanage inside Ukraine that we used the $1,100 from these kids in Utah to help out these kids. Oh, I need to go back. Need that to play. This little girl right here, she is so animated. Bert, primary children, you got me in tears. So I could have spent the last half an hour, and I'm out of time, talking about all of the death and the destruction and the darkness over there. and it's there. But you know, the beautiful thing is there's a lot of good things going on. A lot of good people from the U.S. and from all over the world over there helping out. And I just wanted to invite everybody to join in and send some of that light over in their darkness. And so, great opportunity coming up November 7th through the 9th. We'd love folks to donate or even come out and just volunteer out at Canyon Crest during those times. People say, well, Rob, what about money? Yeah, we'll take money too. And money is actually very helpful because, yes, we can buy things over there. And it's a lot easier to do that. But a lot of folks just like to donate things, and that's fine too, because we've got a network that we can get it over there for cheap. But this gives you some information that, Tyklewood Charities is a 501c3, everything's tax deductible, and every dollar goes to help the Ukrainians. When I fly over, or any of the volunteers go over, it's all paid for by the volunteer. Every cent goes to help out in Ukraine. And so that's the opportunity there. The other way you can help out, or if you want to track how you help out, is on Facebook. I have a Type of Wood Charities Facebook page. If you want to see your aid getting directly to the front lines, I post that on a regular basis. And so eventually you're going to see Magic Valley, Idaho stickers on those boxes going over and that aid getting sent out. So Facebook page, and then anything I send out saying spread the word, please share that. Share that with all your friends so that we get the word out. With that, that's it. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you very much. He'll be around if anybody has questions after the meeting for a few minutes.